Hi guys, welcome to Social Anxiety Inside Out. This is session number 31, and just to recap what these sessions are about for people who haven't been on here before, it's just an opportunity for you to hear different speakers and myself share their experiences and knowledge around a new psychological paradigm called the Three Principles, also known as health realization. And I really suffered with social phobia myself for my teens and 20s, and I still get those feelings come up now and again, and I still get anxious. But before that, I was always trying to overcome it by forcing myself to do the things that I was afraid of, which is what most people do. But what we're looking at here is how our experience is created through these three principles. And this week our special guest is Joe Bailey. Joe Bailey's from near St. Paul in Minnesota in the United States. Joe is a psychologist who specializes in the three principles, and at the moment is doing a lot of coaching and consulting for the health industry, so helping professionals with helping them with their resilience and reducing the burnout rates. And Joe has authored 5 books, one of those being the center of our topic tonight, which is Fearproof Your Life. And I'm really excited about this one because fear is something that we all experience, and Joe is going to share his experiences and what he's learned to be useful for others this evening. Hi Joe, thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm good, Steve. Thank you for having me on your show. Appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to talking about fear-proofing our life. So that'll be a good place to start.
Yeah, me too. So how I wanted to start is if you could just tell me a bit about yourself and your background, and just a bit about how you experienced anxiety when you were younger as well.
Sure. Well, I guess part of the real motivation, mostly unconscious for me, was to get into the field of psychology in the first place, was that I really wanted to free myself of my prison of thought, my prison that I lived in. Because in grade school and elementary school, I had school phobia. I would get sick before I went to school every day. So I just lived in a very insecure state of mind, and was always wanting to please other people and get their approval, and I overcompensated for that by becoming kind of a class clown, and using humor as a way to get my bearings socially. And but of course it just went underground. People couldn't see that I was fearful, but I was feeling it on the inside. And I'd wake up every morning with a pit in my stomach, and worrying about what was going to happen that day, or if I didn't know what to worry about, I'd make something up, because I had this feeling that was always with me of fear. Just general anxiety, and just shortness of breath, sick to my stomach, headaches, backaches. I mean, all the symptoms that are classic with anxiety and fear. So, but I learned to kind of cope with that, kind of like you did. I made myself go rock climbing and whitewater rafting and all these dangerous sports, and I would push myself. And I liken it, I use this analogy in my book, it was like I had a really leaky canoe, and it kept filling up with fear. And I developed better and better techniques for bailing the water of fear out of my canoe. But it was a full-time job. I was always meditating or running or going to a support group or looking outside of myself for a way to cope with all this fear, stress, anxiety, insecurity, low self-esteem. It all kind of is in a big pot. And so I went into psychology and hoping that that would help me, and all it really did was give me a bunch of labels and a lot of good reasons why I felt the way I did, you know, from my childhood, my background, my upbringing. And so I studied under some of the better psychologists in the United States and just had very complex theories for understanding my pathology and for understanding everybody who I treated. And but it really wasn't working. It was a heavy workload to constantly be coping with fear. And about the age of 33, I came across the three principles through my best friend, Dr. Keith Blevins, who you may know of, Steve. He's been to England a few times and spoken there. And Keith Blevins and I went way back to graduate school, and he was always into the latest new psychology, and so I had grown very burned out and skeptical about any new approach. But there was something about this that pulled me. I don't know, you know, sometimes you just get pulled, whether that's a intuitive thing or a gut feeling, a spiritual guidance system in operation or whatever, but I was drawn to attend this seminar in Florida in 1980. And there I met Sydney Banks and some of the founders of this three principle psychology, which was in its infancy at that point in time. It didn't really have a name at that point. It was just a nice feeling, you know. It was a little hard to get your hands on. And but I was very impacted that weekend. I would say that was a turning point in my life. The most major turning point of my entire life was that weekend. It was that weekend that it was like looking through a telescope my whole life through the wrong end. And I couldn't understand why I kept bumping into things because had a distorted view of life. And what Sid did was he basically turned the telescope around and says, hey, you might want to look at it this way. And I thought, wow, this is life. It's so beautiful, you know. And it was like this whole, it was an awakening. It was like an awakening to something I always knew and how I felt when I was a young child before I got contaminated with all my own thoughts and fears and insecurities. When I had a free spirit and was curious and joyful and carefree. And I re-experienced that feeling that weekend. It was like coming home, really. But I was a highly developed professional by that point. I had a large, successful counseling practice. I taught people all over the world about addictions and family therapy, and I had a good thing going. And when I went back to work, when I returned from the seminar, I knew I couldn't do what I had been doing before. I could no longer take people back in the past and hyperanalyze their lives. I knew I had something, but I didn't know what I had. I didn't know how to articulate it. I didn't know how to teach this. I didn't know how to pass it on to others, but I just bumbled through in a way and shared what I was beginning to see on that weekend about the three principles in the best way I could. And even with my clumsy, awkward way of talking, my clients just started to respond in extraordinary ways. And they would say things like, why didn't you tell us this before? Can I have my money back from the last 6 years? You know, things like that. And because I was giving them something that was like getting a GPS. And you're in the middle of the jungle, and before you had the GPS, you had no idea how to get out. And then suddenly you had this GPS with maps that would Google Earth you up and show you where you were, and you were only 20 feet from the road and you didn't know it. And there was a guidance system. The principles are like a guidance system that got me back on track with that true self, with that inner capacity for resilience and health and mental well-being that had eluded me as my burden of thought got greater and greater. So this was a game changer for me when I met Sydney Banks. And I thought he was crazy, frankly. When I listened to him with my intellect, I thought, oh, this guy with a ninth grade education is going to change psychology? Yeah, sure. And so my brain was having conniptions. I don't know if that translates in England. It was doing somersaults, but my heart was just opening up, which was very confusing because I wanted to run out of the room. At the same time, I felt like I had finally found what I had been looking for my whole life, to get out of this fear. And so I just started talking about it, and my clients pretty much convinced me the power of this, because they changed so quickly compared to what I had been used to, which was years of therapy with people, going back over each minutia detail of their life and their thinking to try to sort it out in a new way. And so that's kind of how I got here into the three principles. And since that time, almost 35 years ago, my whole life transformed. I got a new lease on my career as a counselor. I quit being burned out. My stress went away. Within 3 months, my anxiety level, it went, I'd say, 80% away. And like you, I still have those old patterns of thought. They're in my hardware here, or the software in my mind, but I have like an immunity to those thoughts. I have an understanding of those thoughts, that they're just thoughts, that they have no power of themselves without my consciousness bringing them to life in an experience. And even knowing that, I still forget from day to day. Thought is a very tricky thing. It's very easy to get sucked into the idea that your experience is coming from out there, other people, what they're thinking about you at the party, how they're perceiving you. It looks like your anxiety is coming from their thoughts rather than from your thoughts. So I applied this in the field of addictions. I started a mental health center and an institute where we did research and trained others in this approach. I've written 5 books about the principles on a variety of topics, from relationships to fear. I never thought I would ever write. I was told not to even go to college or university because I had a learning disability. And so at age 40 I started writing books, and I love writing now. And I couldn't speak in public before. Now I speak on national television and talks to 1,000 people, and I'm at home. I feel at home in my skin now, and I didn't used to. So my last book that I wrote was Fearproof Your Life, because I wanted to share with other people who had suffered from anxiety like I had that there was an answer, that there was an answer that was beyond coping with your anxiety through drugs, through alcohol, through medication, through techniques of breathing, and nothing against all of those things. It's just that they're bailing the canoe of fear out. They don't patch the canoe. And this patches the canoe. This stops it at where it leaks, where it begins, which is with thought. So that's kind of a lengthy introduction to what led me to write a book about fear, and what really was for me. I have so much compassion for people with phobias and anxiety, because I've had panic attacks. I've thought I was having a heart attack because of fear. I've underachieved because of my fear. I've not entered relationships that could have been very wonderful friendships or opportunities because of fear. I've limited my life because of fear. And I no longer have that barrier. I still have fear, I still have those thoughts, but they no longer, and I don't have to overcome them. I just know what they are now, and they dissipate. They don't have a life of their own anymore because I know where they're coming from. And that gave me the freedom to be in the world, but not of it. To be engaged in life without creating a fear of life. Even though I have challenging situations, you know, many times being a parent, being a grandparent, being a public speaker, working with very difficult patients at times who are, you know, pretty suicidal or hopeless, you know. But, you know, you're sitting there, you're on the front line, you know, trying to help a human being. You have to draw from something deeper than this. There's a well within each of us called mind that has all the answers we need. And when I know that and trust that, it comes to me. I just know, like talking to you right now, all of you. I don't have to think about what I'm going to say. I don't have to rehearse it. If I do, I'm really in trouble. I do my best work when I'm not thinking about what I'm doing. So
Yeah, well, I totally agree with that. It's such a simple thing you said, but that's exactly when I'm at my best, when I'm not thinking about it. And I just wanted to ask you, what would you say to people who are watching this? And I don't know, I'm just thinking that, you know, there's been times when I felt like, you know, that I'm feeling low, for example, and then, you know, there's not anything particular on my mind. What would you say to people who are experiencing just that kind of low feeling, that, you know, sometimes you can identify when something's bothering you, for example, but what would you say to the people who are watching this and just feeling in a low state? What would you say to them?
well, the way I'd answer that, Steve, is that I think we're kind of like the Earth. You know, we have weather, you know, we have climate, which is the whole thing, and then we have our day-to-day weather. You know, some days it's sunny like it is here today. It's beautiful, nice breeze, June day. And 2 days ago we had 4 inches of rain, and it was 50 mile an hour winds, and limbs were blowing down. And the next day it dried off, and it was clear again. So we're like that psychologically. We have inner weather. Our moods go up and down. Thoughts come in our mind that we can't control, and that to me is one of the most freeing things about the 3 principles, is that you don't have to control your thinking. You can't anyway. Number one, you can't stop a thought from coming into your head. What you do with the thought once it comes in your head, that's another story. But you cannot stop thinking from coming into your mind. That's beyond. I don't know why I think really crazy thoughts sometimes. I think beautiful thoughts sometimes. You know, I'll have insights and go, wow, where'd that come from? Wow, that is an incredible book title, or that's the solution that I've been looking for. And then the next thought is, why is my wife looking at me like that? You know, what did I do now? You know, or, you know, it's like, where do these things come from? But who's watching, observing, sitting at the seat of all that is me. Knowing that I'm thinking, and that thought has no power on its own other than that which I give it. Like if I have a wake up low, which I do too sometimes, I'll wake up in a low mood. I know that if I search in my brain for a reason, I will find a reason for why I'm low. And I'll validate that low feeling. But if I know it's just a low feeling, and if there's something for me to realize about that, if I need, like if I need to have a conversation with my son, or I need to prepare for a meeting that I've got coming up, and that's a little anxious feeling about, oh, I've got all that to do today, then instead of obsessing about it or dwelling on it, I just do it. So it's just it's like a cue to let me know, or a clue to let me know that, oh, there's something you need to do over here. It's like you could call that intuition, the voice of intuition, or creativity flowing through you. So you get an idea that's a prompt for an article you want to write, or a blog that you might want to do, or an email you need to send. And so it's like there's this flow of thought that's coming to us all the time, 24/7. And sometimes that thinking is what I would call from a superconscious state. It's on the insight level, the new thinking level, and sometimes it's just a Memorex thought. It's just a replay of a memory or an association. And there's no good or bad thoughts, I would also say. It's like no good or bad thoughts. They're just thought. So if you don't judge a thought, or you don't try to control a thought, it'll just pass on through if it's of no use to you. It's like clouds passing through, or weather passing through. It'll go on around the planet. It'll just keep moving. Because that's the nature of thought. It's always moving, unless we grab a hold of it and obsess about it, or try to control it, or change it, or think something else other than that. As soon as we engage our ego in trying to control our thinking, we make it stick around longer. And that's why positive thinking doesn't work. That's why thought control doesn't work. That's why distraction doesn't work. That's why all of these coping mechanisms don't work, because you're giving power to a thought that has no power except the power of your own consciousness. I'll let that sit for a minute. Thought has no power other than the power you give it with your own consciousness. Consciousness is like the breath of life that breathes into a thought and creates the sensation of that thought through the body and feeling. So you have a thought of, oh my God, should I go to that party on Saturday night or not? Oh, but some of the people that are going to be there, I don't really feel comfortable around them. But I really do want to go to that party because there's that girl I want to meet, and she's there, and I don't want to miss that. Yeah, but what if she's got a boyfriend now? And on and on and on and on. Right? This is what we do. So if we misuse the power to think by overanalyzing our thoughts or trying to control our thoughts, it's like putting a dam in a river, and they start to pile up and create pressure, and that pressure backs up into a pond, and that pond gets stagnant, and because water that's not moving has no life in it, and you can't drink it. When you recognize your thinking in the moment, it's like lifting the dam. You lift the dam up, and the water flows, and gradually it cleans out the river. It decontaminates your mind. It clears your mind. And in that moment of clarity, you have new thinking, and you go, oh, what the heck, I'll go to the party. See what happens. I can always leave. And so you start doing things you wouldn't normally do. You're not limited by your fears as you once were. And if you are, you don't judge it. It's like, okay, today is not the day I'm going to go to the party. No big deal. Maybe tomorrow I will. or the next opportunity that comes up. So it's getting out of that judgmental role and trying to fix yourself role, which is really what's got us all screwed up, is that we try to fix ourselves. There's nothing to fix. Beneath all of our insecure thoughts lies this resilient, perfect, wise, loving self that's just waiting to come. It's just, and the beauty of the principles is that as you deepen your understanding of them through insight, the principles actually do the evolving for you. You don't have to do anything. It just keeps evolving you. And so you get freer and freer of your thinking, even though you're going to have moments where you're not going to see this. And that's really important to know, that it's not a there to get to, oh, now I'm healthy. No, it's like learning, when it rains in London, just get your umbrella out. Put on your raincoat. It's going to rain, right? So you don't go out there in your short sleeve shirt and no hat. You dress for the weather. When your thinking is muddled and fearful, you just, oh, okay, well, just take it easy today, you know. Have a cup of tea and go for a walk, you know, just, it'll pass. It'll pass. But if you fight with it, you wrestle with it, it gets stronger. Steve, do you ever watch Star Trek?
No, I've never been a fan, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. Well, some of your listeners might be Trekkie fans. There was one scene where Captain Kirk is in this other galaxy somewhere, and he's fighting this being, and the way the being gets its power is it takes the power of the person it's fighting. And so the more he'd get angry, the bigger this being would get, and stronger it'd get. And he finally had an insight, and he realized that if he just calmed down, it just shrank down into this little thing that had no power. And I think that of that, like fear, you know, when we try to fight our fear, it gets big. And when we see it for what it is, and we understand how our mind works, it shrinks our fears down to a manageable level, where they're just a passing thought, rather than a reality that's just got us by the grip here.
Mm. Thank you. That's so useful, because I've been wrestling a lot today. I've got an event coming up around this topic at the weekend, and I was just, because my mood was low for whatever reason today, I was thinking all these thoughts, and I was thinking, how can I be sharing this stuff if I feel so rubbish? And then I started analysing over and over and worrying, and it felt quite frustrating, and it felt slightly unpleasant, but I still knew that it would pass. It's nice to know that I've got that resilience there, because if it happened, you know, a year or so ago, before I came across these principles, I would be feeling a lot worse, and it would have lasted a lot longer. So I'm very grateful for that, and yeah, thank you, Joe. That's been really useful for me. And I was talking to someone on Facebook earlier on, and I can't remember what she said, but she was telling me to just to basically be there with whatever I'm experiencing. And I noticed that what I do, what so many people do, is just try and find something to distract us from just being with what we're experiencing,
right,
in our thoughts in that moment. And one habit that I have is around food, and um, I would go and eat to distract myself, or um, you know, a classic one that everyone does with their emails, just check emails just so something comes in, so you can distract yourself that way. And I just noticed I just wasn't letting myself just be, and I know without fail that when I do that, my mind does settle down, and that stress just melts away. And yeah, and it's really fascinating. It's like the dust settles when all this stuff's going on in your mind. You really, for me, I think it's, the outside world has changed, but it's all the activity going on in my own mind that I'm thinking is real on the outside. Um,
I was on Brett Chitty's show last week. You know Brett?
yeah,
And he reminded me of an analogy that I use that refers to what you were just talking about. In my book, Slowing Down to the Speed of Love, I talk about love, which is another thing we look for, true love, like peace of mind, happiness. And I talk about true love as being like a jewel at the bottom of a pond. And when we see it there, we want it so badly, we dive into the pool and we frantically try to grasp it. But as we frantically move in the water, it stirs up the silt and obscures where the jewel is. And it's counterintuitive in a way when you're really wanting something so badly to just sit back and do nothing, to get up on the shore and just wait for the silt to settle till you can clearly see where it is and then slowly go in and pick it up. But that jewel is always there. That jewel is always there in us. That serenity, that peace of mind, that feeling of love and connection to others, which we all want so badly. Especially people with social phobia, they really want to be connected. They feel very lonely and very disconnected. But when we sit on the shore of that river or that pond and just let the mind do what it already knows how to do, which is to settle. You don't have to do anything to make it settle. As a matter of fact, anything you do to try to make it settle keeps it unsettled. So it's a faith that it will settle, and when it settles, the jewel will be revealed. And that's what it is. Whenever I need an insight, whenever I need a new thought, a new way of seeing something, an answer to a problem, when I quit thinking about it and I just kind of do nothing about it with my intellect, then it pops in just when I need it. And having practiced these principles or learned about these principles for 35 years, the only thing that's really changed for me is that I spend less time swimming around in the pond trying to find it and more time getting to experience the jewel. So it's like you, Steve, is less time. I don't stay there as long. It doesn't happen as often, but it still happens, and I'm not afraid of it anymore. I'm not afraid of my own fear anymore. And that's mostly what fear is fear of getting fearful. Because when you get fearful, you'll be miserable, and you'll be isolated, and you won't act on your heart's desires. So we fear fear. Franklin Roosevelt once said, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself," when he was speaking to Americans in the Depression. And when we had nothing and our economy was in shambles and And he was just the voice of hope. And he gave that great speech about fear. And I think Winston Churchill used that same phrase at another point in England. So it's in the common wisdom of our world to know that we have nothing to fear but our own thinking about fear. We know this in our soul. We know this in our heart, but we get disconnected from that spiritual knowledge, and we end up trying to figure it out with the smallest part of our intellect is right here. The biggest part is so infinite. It has all the knowledge of all time. And it's right there on the bottom of the pond, waiting. I wonder if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, there's some questions that have come in. Before we get on to those, I wanted to ask you what these three principles mean to you, because I know you've covered each principle, but just to give people a recap if they've never heard of this, could you explain what they are, please?
Yeah, I'll just give you my take on it. Was that the whole question?
Yes, in short, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. For me, it's kind of like this computer that we're all sitting in front of right now. You know, it's plugged into a wall socket. Yours might look a little different in England, and other countries in Europe will be a little different socket. But the source of that energy is invisible to you. You can't see where it's coming from. You just plug it in the wall, and it makes your computer go on, right? And your lights and everything else. So mind is like that source of energy, that source of invisible power that when run through the mind, the personal brain, creates a human experience, perception, emotion, behavior, thoughts, and experience of our life. So mind is the power source, the electricity. The computer is just without any programming, without any software, it would just be white noise on the screen. There would be no sound, there would be no picture, there would be nothing. But it would be potential for anything. You could put a picture of someone being killed on here. You could replay Hitler's speeches on here. You could watch a comedy on this. You could have a wonderful program with you, Steve, and be sharing about these principles. What you put into the computer is thought. And thought is what takes all these gazillions of pixels on this screen and turns them into an image that you have an experience with. So your thoughts are like all those, thought in the big T is all the pixels. The thought that you have is the little t thought that creates the image. So thought is the software on the computer, which is infinite. From the most evil image thought that you can possibly put on this to the most transcendent, true, beautiful thought you can imagine or image. You know, you ever get those photographs from the world's greatest photographers of nature, and they're just these mind-blowing images that when you look at them, you feel tranquil and mesmerized. And then you can turn on the news and get scared to death. So thought is neutral, but what you put into thought creates a sensation, and that's what the computer is. The computer is what brings that thought to life so that you can experience it through your body as a sensation, a feeling, a perception, a sensory experience of noise, sound, smell, taste, touch, tactile feeling. So we're experiencing life through this vessel of our body that is what makes thought conscious, and is the consciousness that allows us to be aware that we're creating. So it's both self-awareness and the special effects that makes thought look real. It looks like it's out there, that it's happening to you. But in fact, it's all coming from inside the software of this little computer, so to speak. And the free will is that I can turn into this show, or I can tune into watching genocide films, or I can watch beautiful pictures. So I get to, in a sense, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky, the whole free will thing, because at certain levels of awareness, you don't even know you're doing this. You're just a victim of your own thinking. It's innocent. At a certain point, you start realizing how this thing works. It appears that you have more choice, that you're no longer a victim, that you are a powerful being that's creating your own reality. So the principles give us our power back in the deepest sense, that we are the creators of our reality. But we're innocent at the same time. We're so innocent because we often will forget, and that's the way life works. If you didn't forget you were doing it, you wouldn't get to experience life. It's like watching a movie. If you were too aware that you were watching a movie, you wouldn't get sucked into the film and forget you were watching a movie and really enjoy it. What allows you to enjoy the movie is that you forget you're watching a movie, right? If you're with a movie critic sitting next to you in the theater, and he keeps commenting about the poor film quality or the sound effects, or it totally ruins the movie. So Sid used to call it the game of life. You know, it's just a game. You know, we go unconscious and we get into these circumstances, and every time we have an insight, we wake up a little bit more to how it's being played. And that's what the principles have done for me, and I think for humanity. What they will eventually do is, over time, they will go out and people, because I've seen it happen in smaller communities, you know, companies, organizations, villages, where everybody knows the principles. It completely transforms the community, the corporation, the hospital. And people realize collectively where their experience is coming from, and it's a pretty nice place to work or live or be, because people know where they quit blaming each other, they quit blaming the government, they quit blaming the economy and this and that and everything else. They realize where the buck stops.
That's wonderful. So we've got 5 questions that have come in. So this first one is I'll read it out to you first of all, and if you get the gist of it, then okay. This question says, I suffer the effects of social phobia and can't even use the phone on some days. I am unemployed and have to attend weekly job centre appointments. I do want to work, but I'm terrified at the same time. I apply for jobs every day, and occasionally I get interest from employers from time to time, but I don't follow it up as it might actually lead to a job. I haven't told my job coach, and I'm not sure what to do. Do you have any concrete advice on the best way to handle my situation and how to navigate out of it? Do you get the gist of that question, Joe?
Yes. Yeah. Well, you can't figure out how to get out of your problem with the same thinking that created the problem. So what you're looking for to solve your problem is from it will come from an insight. It won't come from strategizing how you can beat this job thing. You know, how you can overcome your anxieties. The more you try to I remember seeing a film about movies being introduced to an African tribe in the bush, and they showed a film on a white sheet, and all the natives who had never seen a movie and didn't know what a movie was took their spears and they started stabbing the sheet, and then they realized it was that the images on the screen weren't real, they were just a sheet. Well, the images that we project on the screen of our life, we call our fears, we have to realize first that what we're afraid of is really not out there. It's really in our own thinking, and that doesn't mean that you're at fault, you who've written this question. It just means that you have that power to create that thought that is limiting you now. But you also have this inner resource of resilience that's built into you and me and everybody else, that when we recognize our thinking in the moment, you know, that fearful thought of, you know, like let's say you get a job offer, and the immediate reaction is, oh my God, if I take this job, then I'll have to deal with my fears of people, or what if I fail, or, you know, that opens up a whole Pandora's box of other fears. If you can see even just a little bit that's so innocent that you've had that thought, that will help you feel a little bit of relief to the point where a new thought can come in. And when that new thought comes in, it may be a thought, it may not be, but it may be a thought that opens up a different set of possibilities for you. So that you, like when I was asked to write my first book, I just went, oh my God, no, that just brought up all my horror images of having to turn in papers and getting all these red marks all over them and being told I was a terrible writer, and so I would avoid writing anything. And when I was asked to write my first book by a publisher, I just said, oh, you've got the wrong guy. I was terrified. But something in me said, it called me to do this. I just felt this new thought of inspiration coming in that I had to say yes to it. But as I went to sit at the computer and write the book, I experienced all those fearful thoughts. And at moments I got discouraged, but at other moments, when my personal thinking was out of the way, I could hardly keep up with my fingers. They were writing so fast. The ideas were just flowing through me, and I was feeling this natural inspiration, creativity coming through me. And then I'd go, and I'd read it in a low mood, and I'd go, oh, this is trash. I'd want to throw it. And my wife would read it and she'd say, "No, that's really good. It just needs a little editing, but it's really good. Don't throw it away." So I had encouragement. I kind of went back and forth, and it would be like that with you in the job. You know, you're going to have, it's not going to be, oh, now I'm over all my fears. It's going to be that you take a step forward, and your old thinking comes because you've gone to another level. And every time I go to a new level of challenge in my life, my old fearful thinking still comes back. And I've written books about this. And I've spent 35 years studying it. So if that can happen to me, and I can still keep going up, the same can happen for you. It's just seeing like the natives that were throwing their spears at the white sheet. It's just a sheet. There's no tiger there going to get you. And when you see that, it demystifies life. It doesn't seem so frightening anymore. You start to see that life is really like this benevolent, helpful, guiding light that's taking you to the next step. And it will take you out of fear. It will take you out of fear. And it doesn't mean you will never have a fearful thought again, but it will help you, like there are cancer cells in all of our bodies, but we don't all have cancer because most of us have an immune system strong enough to suppress the cancer cells. We're living in health and immunity of health. Knowing the principles gives you a psychological immunity to not get rid of your thoughts, but to not have your thoughts overcome you, take over your being and become a cancer that destroys your life. So there's hope for someone like you who wrote this. Everybody can change. Everyone's capable of it. And you just have to give yourself a little bit of benefit of the doubt here, that you too can be healthy again.
Thank you, Joe. That was wonderful. Just wanted to say to that person, I can totally relate to what you're experiencing. What you described just sounded like how it was for me when I was younger, in that similar situation. And I hope what Joe's been sharing has been helpful to you. And if you wanted to reply to that with your comments and keep us updated with how you're doing, that'd be fantastic. Okay, so next question, Joe, is this person says, I take medication to help with my anxiety. I want to be more in control of my anxiety and release it. Can this be done still taking my medication, or would I have to stop using it to work with my anxiety?
That's a common question, because anxiety medications do help alleviate the symptoms of anxiety to a degree. They don't make you happy, but they lessen your heart palpitations and kind of help control the parasympathetic nervous system to a degree. So my advice to people who are on medication is, don't stop your medication while you're learning the principles. If they allow you to think more clearly, to be more open, to feel relaxed enough to gain more knowledge, that's a good thing. But what will happen is, as you start having insights, as your understanding goes up, the positive effects of the medication will no longer be needed. And so what you're left with is the side effects of the drug. So you'll experience more and more of the side effects, which might mean making you feel groggy, or each drug is going to be a little different. But when people's mental health level goes up, what they need for medication goes down, and so the dosage gets lowered. when you talk to your doctor about that. I liken it to a pot of boiling water. If the flame is your thinking and it's on high, if you throw an ice cube in that water periodically, it'll keep it from boiling over. But if you don't keep throwing them in, it's going to keep boiling over. But if you turn the heat down, you might not need to throw in as many ice cubes as often. And at some point, you don't need to throw any in, and it doesn't boil over. So that would be the analogy I'd use. You know, the more we're lost in our thinking, the more we're triggering these physiological, neurological impulses in the brain that affect our breathing, our heart rate, our endorphin level, all of the chemicals that make up our feelings and sensations. And so to get a handle on it, medication is a good thing. But after a while, the medication won't be needed, and it will, or be lessened in its need, or it'll only be needed to be used periodically. So, but you work with your physician about the reduction of the medication.
I love that metaphor. That's brilliant, and I hope it's useful to the person asking that question. I'm aware of the time, Joe. Have you got another 5-10 minutes just to finish off these?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit of time.
Brilliant. Okay, so this question is, I am experiencing severe anxiety day to day, and I spend a lot of time in loops of anxiety trying to find a way out with no result. What is the best thing to do when stuck in a loop? For example, when trying to decide a career path?
It's very similar to the last question, isn't it? You know, because it's really all the same thing. We're all caught in a thought loop. You know, that's what worry does. You know, the more you worry, the more there is to worry about. And the more you live in worry, the more problems you create, because, you know, like if you don't get a job, then you don't have any money. And then if you don't have any money, you worry about not having enough money. And that, you know, it's kind of a snowballing effect. So you have to start somewhere to break the cycle, to break the loop. And the way you break that cycle is by doing what you're doing right now. You're listening to this show. You're listening to this program. You're seeking out positive answers, and your inner wisdom will tell you inside as you're listening to this if this is true or not. And if it feels true to you, if it feels like good, wise, sound advice, then that will penetrate your being. It'll kind of hit you in here, and you don't have to figure out how it all works. Like when I came back from that first weekend, I had no clue how to help my clients, and I had no clue how to get over my stresses that I had that were burning me out. But they fell away, and they fell away in the most natural way. Here I am driving down the street. This is a few weeks after my learning these principles. I'm driving to work, and I'm revving up my thinking every mile. I'm stuck in traffic. When is the light going to change? I'd get impatient. I started worrying about all the things I had to do that day. And I could just feel my shoulders tighten up, and I started feeling a headache. My stomach was upset. I was just, shoulders were up around my ears. And all of a sudden I had this moment where I realized, you're not even at work yet and you're already freaking out. You're in the car. And that sounds simple, but also I realized it was my thinking I was dealing with, not the day. And then my perception completely changed, and I could see all the beauty of the trees that I was going by that I hadn't seen moments before. And I noticed the spring happening, and I noticed the flowers, and my whole perception changed. Now, that isn't to say that that thought never came back again. It probably came back 10 more times that day. But every time you have an insight, it takes another layer of the onion off. All the thoughts that are covering up this resilience that's in you. And every time you have that insight, it just makes it a little easier to have the next insight, and then a little easier to have the next insight. So it's a progressive, evolutionary thing that the principles do. I mean, and the principles aren't a thing. They existed long before Sid Banks had this insight. It's like gravity has always been here long before Newton formulated the laws of gravity. He didn't invent gravity. He just described what already existed. Sid Banks just described what's already existed throughout time for human beings. And all the religions have pointed to this to a degree. All the philosophies, the great wise people of all time have talked about these truths forever. But what Sid did was put it into a framework that's really simple and accessible for humanity. That you don't have to go to Tibet and meditate and, do yoga for 6 hours a day and all these things to try to, which I did, all of those things. And I stayed very busy doing all those things, but I didn't really experience anywhere near the inner peace that I have now. I visited peace, but I didn't live there. One more question.
Okay. So this question was asked after you spoke about the pond analogy. So this person says, how do you experience the bottom of the pond, Joe? That wider, innate, endless wisdom intellect you referred to, which stands apart from the smallest part of intellect, which we usually identify with. How do you experience that? I get glimpses of something bigger than myself, or it feels that way. When I get calm and quiet, it speaks to me in a loving voice, but I'm not religious. Is that what you mean, do you think?
Absolutely. That's exactly what it feels like to me. That when my mind is quiet, I feel like I'm with a best friend, a loving grandparent, an old wise shaman or something. I feel the impersonal nature of mind coming through personally. Yeah, and it quiets me. It reassures me. It lets me know I'm not alone in this world. That I'm being constantly directed by this resource of wisdom, mind, and I work with a lot of scientific people who are not religious, not believers in God or anything, and they get very profound mystical experiences after learning the principles. They say, I don't feel religious, but I feel very spiritual. I feel very connected. I experience this benevolent help that's there. I don't know what to call it, but it sure feels good. So that's what I would say to that's dead on. That's how I feel. I feel in my darkest hours that I always have this guidance there when I turn to it that gives me just the right answer that I need to hear at that moment. And I work a lot with drug addicts, heroin addicts, and alcoholics who are people who have lost everything, all family, you name it, and they've hit rock bottom. And a lot of them will talk about that experience of an inner voice or a kind, gentle, loving sensation that comes through them in their darkest hour, which is their turning point, where they start getting help, sobering up, turning away from the drugs or the alcohol. So it's a common experience. The studies of near-death experiences reveal the same type of experience. And then people put labels on that, and they create religions and create belief systems out of it. But it's a common human experience, and every time it happens, I can't make it happen, but whenever it happens, I'm really grateful. It's not like a faucet you can turn on. You have to let the silt settle.
Wonderful, and that's the perfect question to end on, I think. And wonderful conversation with you, Joe. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Stephen. I really wish all of you who are listening today, whether you're here today or listening to a recording of this later, that you really find what I've found and thousands of other people on this planet have found, the peace that comes with understanding that we are the power of experience, and we have this gift of thought to create the life we've dreamed of, and it's there awaiting our understanding and our awakening. And I wish all of you the best in that search, because it's not out there, it's right here, right under our noses.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Joe. I don't think I'll add anything to that. I'll leave it at that, and that's the perfect way to end. So, yeah, I hope we bump into each other someday. And yeah, thank you again for coming on, Joe.
You bet. It was good to talk to you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye bye. All the best.